Hello, everybody, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, everyone. Welcome to the very first episode of the Schubert Talks series. I am incredibly excited because it's been a while, and this is a project that I wanted to try out with various artists, and here we are. So, let's get to it. We are going to dive in to the deep end of Schubert. We are going into the darkest realm. We are going into Winterreise, Schubert's darkest and most powerful song cycle. And I am not going to be doing this talk alone because that'll be kind of interesting just doing this talk alone. But I have a special guest with me, and I'm thrilled and honored to have her. For those of you who might or might not know her, Christine Mello is a cellist and educator, passionate about bringing the power and beauty of classical music to everybody. A graduate of Temple University in the studio, Curtis Institute of Music, Mello studied with luminaries Orlando Kroll and the founding member, who is the Art of Bow and founding member of the Curtis Quartet, and Metal Watts of the New School of Music. She also has performed a range of musical styles on diverse stages in Europe and America. Her orchestra experience include performing as a cellist in the Allentown, Williamsport, and Lancaster Mid-Atlantic Symphonies. Also as the Duplicate Dio Orchestra assistant principal cellist for the Atlantic Coast Opera Festival and principal cellist for the Jersey Shore Pops. Also, she has done an amazing take on her own with Schubert's Winterreise, and I was very honored and I'm very lucky to have worked with her in a production of Ariadne auf Naxos in the 2019 Festival of Music Academy International. So, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, please give a warm welcome to my dearest friend, cellist, musicologist, and Schubert expert extraordinaire, Christine Mello. Christine, whenever you're ready. There you are.
Yeah, it's pretty fast. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm super excited to talk about Winterreise and Schubert in particular, and how Schubert and Winterreise relates to the cello. Lots of fun stuff. Really excited to talk to you today.
This is amazing. You know, like, again, like I got to know you from the festival that we did in Mezzano. So to like now come again, not only as performers, but now really as historians, as we go into, as I said previously, as we dive into this incredible depth of Schubert, and as we go into this realm of his darkest moment, his darkest period in life. I think it's kind of interesting to just really go into deep and then going back up. You know, it's in a way like, no, like, I think maybe some people might do this with other composers. So this is a fun thing to think about.
I think going into Schubert's darkest, if you're going to begin with Schubert's darkest time, the best thing is to begin with is Winterreise. He was literally dying as he was writing it. He was on his own winter's journey. And the song cycle itself actually begins at the end.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So like,
yeah.
With Winterreise, I mean, this was composed within a span of a year. I mean, it was composed in February of 1827.
Yep.
And it was at first it was just a pack of 12 songs by Wilhelm Müller, the same poet that he used for Die schöne Müllerin. And at first, like, this set was found in a collection called Wanderlied. Yep. And it wasn't until later that he added 12 more songs, in which we all know and kind of perform into this realm of the 24 song cycle. You know, like, so I have to say, it's something that's quite intriguing and something that's quite mysterious at the same time, because, you know, there's so many things that I feel that a lot of us, even myself, we're all still learning from Schubert. But I think that for a lot of us, this cycle, there's a rich amount of information to discuss. And I know that with people like Graham Johnson, who has written a vast amount of information of Franz Schubert, I think there's still more that we can retain and we can really like discover. But I mean, from your perspective, can you tell us a little bit about about the composition of Winterreise itself. I mean, I know this was written in his final moments of his life. I mean, he just was just diagnosed with syphilis, and at this point he was going psychologically mad and insane. Does all of this sort of pertain to what has gone into Winterreise?
I would actually, yes, I actually do think that, to go back, Schubert is on his own winter's journey. When he actually sees the first the poems in the 1823 Almanac Ordinania, and it was a series of 12 poems that then would later have the addition of 12 more. And Schubert had already worked with this poet before, Mueller, and really liked it, had great effect to it with Die Schöne Müllerin, and so it was time to take a look at something else. He was acutely aware that he was dying, but I believe he did not actually know what at the time, what it was exactly.
Right.
But he did know that he was dying, and he was also struggling to make ends meet. He would have parties, but he was too weak to play at them, and so on and so forth. These parties were Schubertiads, where he would have premiered this. And so there this song cycle. So he was working with this song cycle in his own winter's journey that he was aware of. I do think that it does play into that. It certainly must. One cannot face their own mortality and not have it deeply affect them. And know that that's coming.
Right. I mean, like we see this a lot with various composers. I mean, for me personally, I see this in Benjamin Britten, especially with some of his later operas, especially with like Owen Wingrave and Death in Venice. Even his later song cycles, I see that within Benjamin. So funny that you mentioned how we do see that in various composers. So that's a brilliant example too.
Yes, so that's kind of one of the things that, so for those who, so one of the things I had done was I'm a cellist, that's what I do. But I'm also a musicologist that studied Schubert deeply. And one of the things I like to do is to take the music of Franz Schubert, or music in general, but basically the music of Franz Schubert, and interpret it for myself, transcribe it, do the analysis of it, which I'll get to in a second, and then perform it to show the narrative. But in order to do that, in order to show that narrative, you have to understand the composer, where they were coming from and where they were headed next, which is why Winterreise is a really great place to look, especially because the song cycle itself is simply about that. Not where he has necessarily the main character has been, but rather where is he going next. And that's what's actually really great about the song cycle.
One thing that I'm quite amazed at is the fact that and I could be wrong at this, but most for most song cycle composer, rarely do I see them going back to the same poet. And I see that Schubert has gone back to Wilhelm Müller. Now, we have seen this with various composers. I mean, we see this with Mozart, and as we kind of joke about this, the De Ponte saga, which we see this trilogy of operas that were written by Lorenzo da Ponte with Giovanni, the Marriage of Figaro, and Così fan tutte. It's interesting to see how an art song composer, a lieder composer would go back to another poet to create an epic story, like what we saw and what we would all witness in Schöne Müllerin. And I'm just curious, why would someone like Wilhelm Müller, why would Schubert go back to someone like Wilhelm Müller? And I mean, we see this a lot with we see this with some composers, but with art song composers, I'm very fascinated with that.
Yeah, so basically Schubert had a series of poets that he really, really liked. And of course, at the time, it was looking mostly at Germanic poetry. We're talking very early bits of nationalism going on here. And so he really had a sense, both Goethe and Müller, he really, really liked and continuously came back to. You also have at the time, a celebration of the German language and in general, again, the standardization of the German language, all of this was happening at the same time. So it would be intrinsic that he would use the same composer, or a composer of poetry, and because he often went back to the same ones. This one in particular, I think it just struck him. The title itself, Winter's Journey. The title itself is what Schubert was on. I mean, it just makes sense. He found it. He immediately worked with it. He wrote the first half in February, next half roughly a little bit later, and he's out of the picture by, less than a year later.
Right.
So I just think it was intrinsic for him. And part of my analysis kind of covers that journey that Schubert goes on, that human beings, we all go on through various deaths, the death of something that we had that we thought was going to be forever, the death, a life, a relationship, anything. So that's really what this
And
was
possibly
about for
from
me.
like what he's done with the Shinamuden. I know like with Shinamuden, it's very like it's a very narrative, straightforward concept. But with something as I'm not and not to say that Shinamuden is nothing worth learning and worth performing, but to see that something like that, to see an epic like Shinamuden, do you think that maybe because of that he went back to Wilhelm and decided to just say let's give it another shot?
It's possible. I haven't seen any like diary writings on that. I'm sure it does exist. I would actually love to check that out. So I would be more interested in knowing that. If I find something, I'll definitely write back, let you guys know in the comments below. But I haven't seen anything in his diary just yet with that. But I do think that if you take the Schöne and you take, which just means the Miller Maid, and you take Winterreise, they're two very different song cycles. And I mean, obviously they're different song cycles, but you have one that is very, you're correct, it's straightforward, and it's really about saccharine, youthful love that's here and gone, whatever reason, and it's the worst thing ever, and we just need to die already. And it is masterful and wonderful, but it is for someone younger going through these types of feelings. Winterreise is harrowing, frightening. It's the psyche. You don't actually get other characters, except these other characters are mystical. You don't really know the other person in this situation. They're only named by a pronoun. And it's a battle with the psyche that is also a battle between life and death of a relationship and of a human being themselves. So that's why it is a sad one. That's why I brought my hater glasses. You know, because Winterreise, I'm sorry, I told you I was going to do this.
No,
so
okay. You know what? I think within in the realm of something like a virtual talk show, I think there needs to be some sort of like haha moment. You know what? Maybe I should hold on a second. You know, maybe I should just do the same thing and just put on something as us. You know, I know we're both wearing Warby Parker glasses, which guys, this has
hashtag
like Warby Parker has no promotion against this. We promotion with this series. We just
they can though they want to.
They can if they want to. I mean, I'm just saying, we both love Warby Parker glasses, but I guess in the spirit of it, I'm just gonna wear my quasi Schubert
I actually saw Schubert's glasses. I had saw them in real life. They are very small. Also, if you're watching and you just recently, about last week, there was a computer face made from Schubert's death mask. You might get a really good look of what he might have looked at like in real life. So very, very cool. But back to Winterreise.
You know,
so it's such a sad story.
I gotta say though, you pretty much also answered one of my next questions, but I have to agree in some ways that at the moment I'm working, I'm studying, and I'm practicing Die schöne Müllerin, and
right.
There's many things that I have to say about the cycle in itself, and plus with Winterreise. I find that schöne Müllerin is like I feel like it's kind of like that sort of like old version of a teenage romance, a young romance that you maybe like for some people might find it like I guess like a show like I don't know like Degrassi or something like that. They see that sort of like more dramatic,
right.
And, like,
if we can grow on 20th century. I won't keep these glasses on forever, by the way, just until we get to the analysis. One of the things that actually is really, really great about the Schöne Müllerin and song cycles unto themselves is that I actually think that we get a resurgence of this type of music in popular music, roughly around the 1960s, and it is because of the Teenage Symphony and what ultimately on this earth, what are we really, what's our ultimate goal? Biologically, everything speaking, right? And so totally, absolutely. I definitely think it's definitely for a younger, totally good on Degrassi, by the way.
I wonder maybe if Taylor Swift might have like heard Schöne Müllerin, and maybe like we'll somehow create like an album based on this. Since we all sort of like know that she is the master of like heartbreak songs, so I'm like, one day like Taylor Swift will soon make a more moderate concept of Schöne Müllerin.
Right.
And she'll call it like Shelley Miller or Shelley Miller. I don't know, something like that.
something like that.
Something like that. But I will say though that there is, even though there is a quite a difference between Schöne Müllerin and Winterreise. I mean, Schöne Müllerin, I feel it's an emotional workout because you
Yes.
see this, and not to go off on what the theme is of this episode, but with Schöne Müllerin, it's such a workout in where you see how you see this young lover so full of optimism, and then he runs into like the miller's daughter, falls in love, but she doesn't love him back, and then sees his hunter, and he's jealous as ever, and the only person he has to console is this babbling brook, and then he doesn't love it, and unfortunately meets his demise by throwing himself into the river, which he can't swim and stuff like that. So
Very teenage,
I feel like
very
that's
German, very, very, very,
I feel
very
like that's
teenage,
like
very
a
German.
psychological workout right there, because it feels like
It
a jog.
It is,
Like,
but love when you're a teen is very different from love when you're about to marry someone, and that's where Winterreise comes in. That's why I put these on, because it is that sad. The whole thing begins with the song is just called "Good Night." The first song, Winterreise, we get nothing but "Good Night," and the first person we hear is the main character that says, "I don't know why you dumped me. We were about to get married. I don't know why you dumped me. You won't answer me. Every night I used to come here and say goodnight to you, but I guess since I can't anymore, I'll leave a little note on your gate."
right.
That's a different kind of sadness.
Right. And then as we look more into the journey of Winterreise, for winter's journey and everything like that, I always find that it's such a maze. It's a labyrinth of like different emotions that
Yes.
I'm also gonna put on my Warby Park glasses as well.
Very much.
Anyways, I find this as a the Winston collection. I love them. Anyway, so I find that with Winterreise, it's such a twist. It's a maze. There's like so many twists and turns that you think you're on one path, but then the next song it's a dead end, and you have to go back, and then you realize it's another dead end, and so it's kind of like it's frustration in a way, but in the most, but it's not really frustration. It's like frustration in the most beautiful, profound way, where you see like this sort of protagonist going through like momentums of like annoyance, reminiscence, being alone,
Right.
like existential crisis and everything. I mean, and
Right.
by the end of the song, we do end up seeing another character, which we'll talk about at the very end of this
Yes.
talk. Like it's haunting in many levels and sort of like that. And that's what I see the difference between Winterreise and Schöne Müllerin, even though a lot of people rather prefer like Winterreise, as like, oh my gosh, this is it. But with Schöne Müllerin, there is a lot of things you can harness and you can really learn.
Absolutely.
But it's
This is
but again, it's like an emotional workout.
Yeah, this is, you can't really, it's not really you can't really stack the Schöne Müllerin and sorry, that's my Philly accent. Die Schöne Müllerin and which I'm very proud of, by the way, and Winterreise against each other. They're not really meant to go that way. One, it's just a different song. Not one's better than the other. They're just a little different. But I'm really glad you brought up about the inner duality, because one of my analysis pieces, which I'd love to share with you, is the concept of the this fighting force within you. Will it or won't it? Are we here or are we not here? What is this? How do we truly end suffering? And I really, it's because, and there's this great duality, and I'm so excited to talk about it. So let me know when you're ready to talk about analysis.
Of course, definitely. Just a couple of things.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's lead into that. I just want to call to that.
Of the
I'm going to reference that when we come back to that.
One thing that I would like to talk about is the way how this is written for, I guess, like within the instrumental aspect of it. Like I know that like originally Schubert wrote this for a tenor,
Yes.
but I have seen that it's weird in my page, because like I find that baritones complement this weirdly a lot more than what a tenor would do. Not to say that a tenor can fulfill what Schubert wanted, but somehow I feel, because of the deftness of the music and the text, and how, like, even with the pianist, because the pianist has a voice in this, it's different from, like, let's say, than like being strophic and then just just being like bum bum bum, and then
it's different than yeah.
But like I feel like with the pianist there's a lot of in depth that I feel that like a baritone has more of a justifyingly of a just a I feel like the baritone can really give this more justification to what the theme is, and I don't know, maybe then I don't know, what do you think? Because I know that like with like Matagonis and like Discow, Kingly Slide have really I'm not too sure if King Slide has done a recording of Shinamune, but certainly Matagonizai and of course Discal has done a great amount of recordings of Shinamune from their lifetimes. I gotta ask, like, compared to something like with one of my heroes, like Ian Bostridge, who does a phenomenal job in doing various fast recordings. I mean, the latest one he did was with Thomas Addis, who we all know is
Right.
very recognizable for doing operas such as the Tempest and his latest
Right.
and most
Right.
fascinating work, The Exterminating Angel. How does it kind of like how does a baritone make it more justifiable than like a tenor?
So I'm not a vocalist, right? So I mean, I'm not a vocalist. I mean, I am a vocalist, but not in that. I didn't study voice in this sense. So I can only really talk to it about the narrative and the age. And I actually do think that's what we're talking about here. Age can be defined in a narrative sense by the depth in general. Now, I'm not saying that's always the case. That's sometimes the case. I do think that the baritone, as a person who is and analyze this music, I do think that a baritone would be better suited for it based upon the age, not upon the interpretation or the timbre.
Right.
However, you're right. It was written for Michael Vogel, um, who was a tenor, but that was who
Mhm.
was available at the time and who was able to commission these. However, I think that Fisher Dieskau does a great interpretation. While he does change the keys, which I'll get into in a second, why I'm not really super into when it comes to the type of analysis I do. No disrespect. I think if you got to do it, you got to do it. But when it comes to interpretive analysis, I like to try to keep the key there. But I really think Fisher Dieskau, when he sat down with this, he unlocked something. I do believe it's an older character. I do believe that needs to be represented. Not needs, but could be represented by a deeper voice. I don't know how that translates, as I'm not necessarily a vocal teacher or vocalist.
Right,
I
of
can't
course.
speak to that.
However,
But
I see that one thing that I realized is that you actually have done a take on Winterreise
yes,
yourself. And
I
could you explain
have.
further how you've done that, how you've done your interpretation of Winterreise through cello?
Yeah, so my thing is I discovered these when I was like and discovered like I came upon them in a class um at Temple University, shout out Temple University, and
Right.
they just kind of blew me away. I was going through some changes in my life at the time. It was maybe in my early 20s, and I was looking at this and I thought, wow, this is like something I really vibe with. And on top of that, just looking at how Schubert handled the piano as a character unto themselves in different ways. And of course, we see this in Der Irrkönig, and Schubert had already been doing this. What I love about Schubert, his music is like an onion. You keep just peeling layers back. Year after year, I'm still finding things in these scores. Before going live, I was literally like, I need to change this part of, I have everything now. I need to change this part of my book because it's not like I have a different opinion now. So, you know, I think so. The way I approached it was I'm a choral singer, but I'm a cellist. So I want to play these pieces because I think they're incredible. And I do believe that string players in particular should connect with the voice. All instrumentalists should connect with the voice. But as a string player, I think that that's so, so important for me. I need to connect with it, and I need to be performing like a singer when I play my instrument, but distinctly like a cellist. So I started working with these as etudes, just playing the vocal line, having some fun with it. And eventually I started really thinking, I do think that a narrative could be presented here without the text. Now I know that's pretty radical. So let me walk through how I did actually I know it's pretty radical to say no text, but so what I did with the analysis was that I took apart to deal. So I'll show you some pictures. I'm very visual.
Right.
So if I look down, I'm looking at my
right. But
my notes
before we go into the in-depth analysis, I do agree
Sure.
in the aspect of like from like a very chamber standpoint. I know we've had this conversation a while back in how that like I think especially with Schubert, since like and especially with like I've seen and I also have to give I have to also give regards to the classical nerd before doing this video of Schubert, because ultimately
Yes.
and towards the end of it he does say that Schubert is predominantly a songwriter,
Yes.
the leader writer. And so like I can imagine, like especially with like the quartet of Die Forelle and Death and the Maiden. I mean, Death and the Maiden was a song at first, and to really like listen to that from a quartet standpoint and to really like compare that with the voice, I can see that where that needs to be more from a vocal sense, and where like the strings themselves have to treat themselves.
Right. I think the two are interchangeable. I think the two are really interchangeable. I think Schubert is he understood, and he wasn't just a writer of like just like songs. I mean, his quartet music, it's really the piano impromptu is really masterful stuff. However, he does his most experimental work in vocal line. But also, I find that as a writer in general, he was able to understand that instruments themselves are voices and therefore
Right.
should be acting, having a part. And that was really, really amazing. And I really see that in Winterreise. It of course exists in Die Schöne Murmeln. It absolutely just have great examples of that. But I really am enthralled with what he does in Winterreise. So I think it's really important that everybody, both instrumentalists and vocalists, are approaching this in really the same way. And I think Schubert uniquely understood that.
Mm-hmm.
So
as you mentioned that you have your own analysis on some of these songs of Winterreise, and I know that even though I know that it's kind of difficult to really like explain 24 songs in a span of like of a talk show. Like I think like even in a talk show it would be quite like a special type of thing per se, but like like just talk about 24 songs in the span of an hour or 45 minutes would be a little bit much. But I know that we discussed and agreed on like maybe some songs that would be the perfect summarization of what would, like, let's say if I were to give this to like if anyone were to give this to a voice student or to somebody to really to tell them describe Winterreise in at least I would say like 5 songs. I know that we talked about with things like Gute Nacht, der Lindenbaum, Irrlicht, Die Krähe, and then Delilah. You know, like 3 of these songs are very like the most iconic things that people would know.
So let me I'm sorry to interrupt. Let me introduce the songs. For someone who, so Winterreise, by the way, I love lip balm. Winterreise is it has 24 songs in it it's in 2 parts, and that's important. I'm going to bring that up in just a second. And at the very end, you have a choice between in a 24 song between an A and a B, or a regular and an A, that you can choose from depending on your interpretation. And the thing is 24 songs is fantastic. For a vocal student, do the 24. For an instrumentalist, I had to think really hard. 24 full songs with no text and an instrument would be difficult. So I really looked at the school. I looked at the entire 24 of them and have 5 choice ones. I'm not saying they're definitive. I'm not saying you can get rid of the rest. What I am saying is that I do think it creates a good narrative that gives a little bit of a snapshot of what's going on in Winterreise. And they're in this order. I think I love song 1, Gute Nacht. That means good night. And for me, that's that departure. And I'm going to get into the narrative too, So I did Gute Nacht, the good night. I did Der Lindenbaum, the linden tree. Irrlicht, which is like the ghost lights. Die Krähe, the crow. And Der Lehrmann is the 5th one, the final one. And from there, I like Schubert, right? Like Schubert. So for anybody watching Schubert, when he wrote Winterreise, he did have a key scheme in mind. And this is where I want to tell you about that inner duality. See, the thing is Schubert used something called the double tonic complex.
Right.
And what he did was he wrote 2 parts of this song to be written, or this song cycle, which is to be seen as almost like a concept album. Marvin Gaye's What's Going On, very, very pertinent to right now. You take a look at that, and you have the first part in D minor, but the second part's in B flat major. Right? So you're like, whoa, it's this inner duality, the outer duality, the own fight that we have in our own mind. And I think a great example of that is Der Lindenbaum, which we can get to in a second. But that's how I approached them. I then analyzed each one of them on both a narrative level and a musical level in various forms, and came up
and I'm looking forward to hearing how your thoughts are within these songs, because as I listen to some of them, like I realized that a lot of them tend to have a lot of very heavy rhythmic moments, because this is, of course, as we say, the title itself isn't just a pretty title, Winterreise, Winter's Journey, that we talk about the individual, going through this, treading through like life itself. So we do hear like in these sort of compound meters where we do hear sort of that footstep. Now, I must say though, because again, I mean, we do hear this like in Mozart in a way, and also with a little bit with Beethoven, which I will say though, even though Beethoven was the original to create the the realm of the of the leader, it was really Schubert that perfected the style and everything.
Yeah.
Do you feel that text painting, like Schubert really sort of like was the blueprint of what text painting would be, with like sooner or later with like with expressionistic composers, and or was this something that was not like a nuisance for composers even during the classical period?
So that's a super loaded question, and the answer I'm going to give often gets like some fisticuffs, but it's okay because I truly believe narrative is real, and then Beethoven was also using narrative. We really
Mm,
only have to look. I mean, one of the greatest examples of narrative is the Heroic Symphony.
right.
And the themes in there, who's coming, the tritones in it, who emerges at the end as the triumphant, these things matter. You can go back further. Mozart does this. Go back further. Beethoven does this.
Mhm.
Palestrina does this. Everybody's using narrative. So it's not that Schubert was doing anything particularly new. The way he did it, however, involved all of the instruments, piano, voice, in the quartet, the quintet, all of it. And they were weaving in and out, not only painting the text, and he wasn't the first to do that, but also creating a sense of atmosphere. And this is based on even the chords that he used. If he uses particular chords, he's setting an atmosphere. Even keys, why keys are so important. If he begins in D minor and we end in A minor, well, we're not really resolved. We've ended on the
Right,
dominant,
right.
so we
So,
don't resolve.
so you think
And
that
this
maybe
is
like,
why.
so you think that maybe like, because I know with someone like Weber, like created this sort of like the oh, it was a very like a nostalgic motif, or a
Yes.
memorative motif before Wagner was did like the leitmotif. Do you
Mhm.
think that maybe like Schubert was sort of that blueprint of what would have been like sort of like the memorative motif type of thing? Because we do hear it a lot in like
Yeah.
things like Rindenbaum and De Vettavana. Like I'm very curious about that. Like was he sort of like that blueprint in a way?
I don't think he's a blueprint necessarily. However, I will also say that while Wagner had very much stated in Wagner's very verbose. He wrote a lot. We can read a lot about him. He left his opinion everywhere, and he felt that Schubert was completely beneath him and not very good incidental, cute little music.
Right.
Schubert does he does really Schubert does shine at the miniature. However, Wagner ends up eventually developing many of these techniques that Schubert uses in leitmotif. Plus, they're writing about a lot of the same Germanic legends,
Right.
using the
Yeah.
same poets. So, is he a blueprint? Probably not the exact blueprint, but I do really think he was kind of like the starting line to set
Of what
everyone,
would be
like
like the
kind of like he set
reminiscent.
the bar for the Romantic era. Like, here we go,
Right.
let's
So
go.
sort of like the reminiscent, like the starting line to the reminiscent motif that we would see in like Weber and then like and other composers that we would
Yes.
before we go into the actually the leitmotif that would Wagner would soon
Yeah,
create
yeah.
and everything.
Yeah, but if you really want to look for leitmotif, being a narrative, so being a narrative theorist, you can look back and find things that do function like leitmotifs that go way back. Bach's a real big fan of that.
Right.
But yeah, in particular, yeah, Schubert's going to do this a little bit differently, and so does Wagner. But is there's what I would say in Winterreise is not necessarily a leitmotif that goes throughout. It's rather the keys that are connected with one another that create the story.
Right.
It's really, really cool. Really cool.
So as we talked about this before, we you and I have negotiated about like the songs, like the very songs that in this cycle. And I do recall taking a German leader class at the University of Miami, and I remember doing a lecture and a presentation on it was pretty much a presentation on Schöne Miller, and I really had to summarize what would be the best songs to really describe Schöne Miller in a span of like 5 songs. So
Yep.
within this, like I know we picked with again with like songs like Gute Nacht, Lindenbaum, Ehrlich, Die Krähen, and The Lion Man, 3 of which are the most iconic tunes in the cycle. Like, do you think that maybe if you were to present this to a student and say, okay, sing this, would this be the right type of songs to really summarize what the cycle may be all about?
I actually say that I say yes to that because, but it's a yes with a but.
Okay.
I absolutely think
It's a yes and it's yes, but no, but maybe.
it's yes with a but. I do think that these 5 songs absolutely capture the spirit of Winterreise. Nothing can replace the full 24. However, audiences being different, agility being different, those type of things, stamina being different. I do think that you can get the idea of Winterreise in these 5. However, there's a lot of back work that has to be done. You have to fully understand these songs and understand where they're coming from. That's part of what I do. When I'm not playing them on cello, I'm coaching others how to pull narrative from music because it's there. It just takes, and when I say analysis, it's funny, I sound like a big giant, like you need to get out a book and get out the Roman numerals and really, and that's a part of it, don't get me wrong.
Right.
What I really mean though is a historical analysis of a person's life, the culture, a cultural analysis. Then we get to the musical analysis, and then we start looking at a linear analysis between the different songs. It takes a lot of work, but what it does is makes the difference between a performance of just simply 5 songs that look really cute and might do well, or 5 songs that actually encompass or give the spirit of a narrative, and people walk away actually feeling something and not thinking, that's super pretty music.
Right, of course. So,
Yep.
like, I know that you have said that you have made your own analysis on
Yes.
on something of not something, but on these songs and stuff. I know Guten Nacht was the first thing, and I would love to hear your take upon this because even for me, as I sing them, I can definitely say, like, even from a vocal standpoint, um, even from an artistic vocal standpoint, these songs, like, every verse is so different that you have to change the range of the volume depending on how everything is set for you. You have these minor keys that you have in the first 3, and then by the final one you have sort of something that's very major in that sort of sense, where you kind of have to switch your brain off into something that's totally brand new. But I would like to hear how your analysis is to take on Gute Nacht.
So Gute Nacht is a strophic song. So it's an A, A B A B kind of thing, and it's broken up into 4-bar phrases that actually connect to 8-bar sentences, total sentences, and each part is not necessarily, each stanza is not the same, because you're right, you mentioned the character has to go through various kinds of emotions. At first it's like, I don't know what, I'm just trying to say goodnight to you and I don't even know what's going on. And then he's like, the next verse, like, I'm just going to take a walk and think about this for a bit. And then the next verse is major, and we were in love and we were going to get married and all this other, oh my, what is all this stuff? And then the final one is like, we're back in the minor again. I don't know. So when we go through emotions of a breakup, we have both joy, sadness, confusion, all these things. And Schubert does this in this strophic song, and he does it in a great way, where the character himself, you can hear him walking, bum bum bum, dum da da da.
Right. I mean, definitely we can hear that.
Right? Yeah.
Sort of like in that D minor, sort of like.
Yup.
It's very, like, we hear that treading, that sort of like that walking. Like, you actually just want to just lie down after like the first couple of bars, because you're just like feeling that sort of pressure and tiredness.
When it begins, I have my score behind me. When it begins, it's just bars of just this
repetitive.
And then the melody begins, da 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 da, and it's just like, when you're broken up with, you're not like, unless you liked it, which power to you if it was your choice, and I love that. But if that is like da 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 da, it's that crying out. It's not so much crying out, but more like da 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 da.
Exactly, like it's more of like
a
sort of like a sigh, like an anxiety momentum of just sighing of like
we begin, and the main character, the first song off the bat, is like, what is going on? It's not about being sad. It's like, what is going on? And that's why I like this. It really does. The modified strophic song. I'm tripping over my words because I'm so excited.
It's okay.
And all verses and stanzas are roughly the same, except for a key change, really, in the middle to the major. And that, again, is showing that duality. Where we're really going to get the real star of the show, I think, is the next one, which is Der Lindenbaum. So that's the real star of the show. So that's how Gute Nacht ends with, what? And pretty much how it ends.
Right, because this is of course, because as we mentioned, like the very last strophic part of the song, you have this moment where you go into major out of random, and then you go back into the minor, because I think it's in a way to fool that audience member, think that is everything gonna be okay, or is he just like having this sort of like mood swing moment that he's like happy, but then he goes into back into a realization, that type of feeling, we don't get. I think we truly get that essence in Dead Lindenbaum, because like we start getting that momentum of nostalgia and romance that we don't get within the next couple of songs, because everything is just so like so sporadic, chaotic, and also just so
Right.
drowning. And then once we get to Dead Lindenbaum, towards the very beginning, until not until the very end, we do feel that sense of nostalgia and sort of like a going back to when things were like at peace and all that.
I'm glad you
But
brought that up. So it's like, whoa,
but
so the way Gute Nacht ends, right? It's just like Schubert's confusing the listener, you're confusing yourself. The main character's confusing himself to be like, okay, maybe it's cool. I remember we were back, maybe we'll get back together again. What is this? He's just blindsided. We get to the Lindenbaum, and what that means is the linden tree. The main character gets and he sees this tree. It's the middle of winter, it's dead, and Schubert shows this. He shows this in the way that he writes. Comes upon it, tree's dead. But when the main character, and this is where Schubert really text paints so beautifully and paints with music in a narrative sense. He gets to the linden tree, and the main character is seeing it dead in the middle of the winter. But if he remembers very hard, he can close his eyes and remember spring, when the tree was fully open and in
right.
bloom.
And if I'm not mistaken, a Lindenbaum, in most social matters, it's pretty much a place where most people would congregate.
Yes.
And sort of like a meeting place, so to speak. By the way, if any of my listeners from Miami Lakes is watching this, if you guys notice that tree in the middle of Main Street in Miami Lakes, that's our version of a Lindenbaum. Anyways, you were saying?
That's cool. Linden trees are a thing here in up in the Northeast, and
Right.
they have these things called helicopters. And when they fall, they're like, "Boo." So we like, yeah. So they're pretty big, and they line the streets in Germany, and they're very important. It's a meeting place. It's a big tree with big shade under it. If you really wanted to get us in, remember, we're talking about the Romantic era here, the Victorian era. If you really want to run away and see like your lover on the side, you need to go sit under a linden tree with those tall branches where no one can see you.
Right.
So clearly the main character is remembering this time where that tree was where he had met his love. In fact, they had carved their names into the bark. He says it in the poetry, and states that they were talking of marriage and all these things. So when he comes upon the tree, you get this beautiful, we're in E major, the cuckoo.
Yeah, exactly.
The cuckoo's really, beautiful.
Right.
We're definitely in nature here. This is definitely about love. And it goes on and it begins. The main character sings, and we have not heard anything like this until this point. Gute Nacht was like, oh, things are bad. It's not going to get any better. But then here we had the stark, beautiful, and I'll put all links below to these pieces, by the way. Or try to, when we rebroadcast this, to write them in for you. So that would be great. Yeah, I think that would be cool. We'll get our listeners some cool stuff. So you don't have to hear me singing. And you get, the main character comes in and you hear life, and it begins with this 4-part chorale. It is between the main character and the piano. It's 4 voices. And to us, it's like when we hear a 4-part chorale that comes in, bum, bum, da, 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 da.
Right.
It's just like, oh, I'm in church. I'm feeling good. Things are good. Spring is awake. Everything's alive. Everything's open. And he talks about the tree, and he physically talks about the rustling of the leaves, and you can hear it in the tree. But then halfway through, double tonic complex comes to play. Halfway through this song, we suddenly find ourselves a little bit we were in E major, we go to A minor. That's the relative. We kind of understand they're going to go together real nice. They're going to play nice together. But then right in the middle, we're starkly in C major. That's the reality. The duality is him visualizing this tree in the summer.
Right.
The reality is it's actually in the winter. We get C major, which is like the most plain whatever key. You can make it sound icy, warm, however you want. Schubert makes it sound icy. There's a death march written underneath as he starts talking about the linden tree. Da 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 dum da dum. That's just going constantly, unrelenting. What I find great about this song, and there's a couple things that are marked that are really interesting, are that we have intertextuality going on between some of the things that Schubert had actually done with Der Doppelganger, with my favorite chord ever. And Dr. Michael Klein, if you're watching this, thank you so much. You taught me everything I know, along with Edward Aldwell from Curtis, and love him. Dr. Michael Klein, my favorite chord is the flat 2/6, which is so you have the Neapolitan in second inversion or first inversion, which
Right.
Schubert has used consistently to show depth. Consistently.
Right,
And
of course,
so it's just so fascinating. So we find this in, and what's called, we find these other examples of what Schubert did in his other works in the Linden Tree. So as a performer, now I'll get to that in a second a little deeper, but as a performer, I need to make sure I understand all of this as I play it. So let me finish the end of Lindenbaum's. It makes your hair stand on end. The main character gets to the end and he sees this tree, and the tree is calling out to this icy cold. Now he's saying, I see this tree, you're all barren. But I remember, and he closes his eyes again, and you hear the chorale again when the tree was in bloom. And the tree calls out to him and says, in here, you'd find rest. Stop your journey. You'll find rest here. The thing is, why I believe that the tree is actually calling for the main character to hang himself in it.
Yeah, I do. You know, funny that you mentioned it. You're not the only one. I feel that most performers do have that sort of notion where, and I think this is where we do see that, because I'm also looking through my Baron Writer score and everything. I'm very happy with this.
Excellent. I'm using the text from Dover. Thank you very much.
I bought this from Salzburg, Austria in 2017. I'm very proud of this one. Anyways, no, but I do agree with you where where you do have that there are many performers and interpreters that will say the same exact thing where the Lindenbaum tree is saying, come over here, here's the noose, stop suffering. You're here, you're like, you found your place of peace. Why not just not suffer enough and just rest here? So it's more of that almost temptation where you want to end it, but then the interpreter is just like, nah, I'm gonna keep going.
Yeah, so that's actually what I find. So the ending of Der Lindenbaum is actually really shocking. The tree saying, here you would have found rest, but the main character just continues walking. He's not even in a good, he's still in a place of disbelief and intense sadness, that to even make the effort of trying to sort his feelings out of any way, even if under these branches you would have found rest, meant that he was going to sit there and think about his problems. He was not going to do that because he's so destroyed that he's going to walk. But the Lindenbaum ends with that this pleading kind of idealized sound, and then the main character is simply walking on and leaving. Exactly. And that leads into the next piece that I have.
With Ehrlich and funny enough, Ehrlich and De Crea are the most fascinating for me because we witnessed these two songs, and at least with Crea for me, we witnessed something of another character, and I think this is where we sort of find that sort of text painting of something of of another person. I mean, this is not until we get into actually Lyreman, but we do with Crea, we do witness we do witness a taunting, and I don't know whether this is as we can maybe nod to Mr. Poe himself and about his poem about some sort of bird. I think it's called a raven.
Some sort of bird I maybe heard about at some point. Some sort of bird I heard. I keep reaching over for things.
But with Ehrlich and De Crea, they're both two of these pieces, which funny enough, again, they're some of the works that are, correct me if I'm wrong, maybe not as noticeable as maybe we should have added something like Depost, which that's another hallmark of this cycle. But there's something fascinating I find with these, especially Crea, because of the fact that we are introduced with another sort of character.
Right. It's really fascinating. So, let me get myself in a little bit of order here. So. Before we go to De Crea, though, we go to Irrlicht, which is song number 9.
Mm-hmm.
So, and before we get to De Crea, I get to that because there's a little piece, before we get there, we have a little bit of thinking to do as a main character. He walks away from the linden tree so despondent, what's he supposed to do? So he gets into the forest and he sees what we call as the fairy lights, the ghost lights. The English call it the will-o'-the-wisp. This is the little light things, whatever fractions that come down. But the will-o'-the-wisp can also represent in our culture, and in American culture, the unattainable. I can't grab that ball of light So it is the unattainable, and it is
Mm,
through this song, Erlik, that he has the
right.
unattainable. And
By the
he
way,
does this because
for some of my young listeners, if you think of the Will o' the Wisp, if you think of the movie Brave from Disney Pixar, you know what we're talking about.
that's it.
The little
That's it.
blue,
It's
if
a
you see
really,
like the
it's
little blue
being,
light, if you see the little blue light that Merida tries to follow, that's the Will o' the Wisp. So for any of my very
yeah.
young listeners, you know what we mean.
Yep, absolutely. And it means it's you can't catch it in a jar. It's unattainable.
Right.
And even when you come to that decision that things are done, you're going to accept it. Even I'm doing it right now. You have the upper and the lower.
Right.
Okay. Bop bop, right? So in the beginning, da dum, bottom. It's just accepting. Da 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 bum 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 ba ba bum bum. But which that is a sigh and a breathing there. Because Schubert text paints that much. And he does it
Exactly.
through,
Yeah.
yeah, it's crazy. So he gets, the main character is just
Mhm.
like, I can't attain this. And it gets, and you think, okay, cool, he's healed, he's good, it's going to be good. But that's where Decrehe comes in, which is the crow, which is what you
Right.
were just referencing.
Yeah, and
So
then so
yeah,
I'm, as I'm just like poking fun at dear Mr. Edgar Allan Poe. I mean, I feel like this is sort of like we want to hear that nevermore portion, especially with
oh,
something like Schubert. But I mean, this character, this creature taunts the main protagonist, and we're just like, like we're just like leave the dude alone, man. Come on, like this guy's all
right?
like he's been like crazy, but the thing keeps taunting it that I really want to hear the sounds nevermore, and maybe we do hear it, but not bluntly as we would probably see in like something like again Poe's text in his in the Raven.
Right. So to draw on the word nevermore, I think you capture it right there. So
Mm.
Decrehe means the crow. The crow
Yeah.
means a lot of things in both American culture plus the culture that Schubert was coming from, which is this lower Bavarian, Austrian, German um, area. The crow represents sometimes it simply represents death, bad things. Whoa,
Mhm.
whoa, and also a menacing figure. Crows do not go away. If you ever have watched, by the way, do this. It's so cool. I used to do it with my students all the time. Go watch a video of crows tricking eagles and taunting them until they drop their food. It's amazing. They're great. Crows are like wonderful. They're so amazing.
Oh yeah, no,
Um,
trust me. I recall in the mornings when I was in Salzburg back in 2017. Every morning as I woke up, because usually the sun would rise in Salzburg like 5 and I thought it would be like 7 or 8 in the morning, and I was panicking because I thought I would be late to class. But then I would hear the crows like cawing and laughing, and I'm like, oh. And I wake
yeah,
up
it's
and
it's
I'm just like, and then I had to just close the windows and everything.
it's
But
like I go.
I see what you mean, where there's sort of like the just nature's gestures, if you kind of think
Yeah,
about it.
and so yeah, it's like this in crows. They almost sound they're laughing at us. Like
Yeah, yeah.
it's just funny. So for this one, the way the melody goes is that you have the piano da 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 da, like the flapping of the wings da da da
Right,
da da
right.
da da. But then it's this chromatic little ditty. And it's constantly going, descending. And in the romantic era, descension is not good. It's not good. You don't want it. We are always reaching above for all the good stuff, transcendence, apotheosis, and a crow is coming down. That is like, you're gonna die. This is not gonna go well. That's just how it is.
Right, right.
And so, and what's great about this one is you constantly have these hocket melodies go in the way that it's clumsy. It's not clumsy because crows are not clumsy, but it's still the flapping of the wings, the hitting of the wings. Have you ever had a bird attack you? Because I have, and it's
Well,
not fun.
I will say though, there was one bird that landed on my sister's head when she was just very little, and wouldn't even leave the side, wouldn't even just like jump off until we had to just scare it off. But yeah, I do see what you
That's
mean.
there. It's yeah. I'm sure she understands. I had a little bird in front of my house that had some eggs when I was a kid, a nest, and the mama bird obviously doing what she does. I would walk by and she would come out boop, 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 and hit us in the
Exactly.
yeah,
But
me and my family in the
I
head.
do see where
So
you mean in the form of text painting, where this is more of like just taunting the protagonist in that sort of sense. Because even in the text
absolutely.
that we have right here, I mean, if I read it, it'll be like, a crow has come with me from the town, and to this day he has been flying ceaselessly about my head. Crow, you strange creature, will you not leave me? Do you intend soon to seize my body as prey? Well, I do not have much further to walk with my staff. Crow, let me at last see faithfulness unto the grave. I mean, like this is again, like this is, and we do hear that constant motif of the that constant theme of the crow just still swarming around this guy, and
All the
it's
way to
again,
the
it's
end.
until the end, and we do see like his annoyance and irritation with this guy, with this little bird,
Yeah, especially when
and
he calls
and
out crow, why do you follow me? He calls out cray, and he goes like that. And you've got these Hakken like gukka between the right hand and the left hand going a constant, but they're both in the treble clef. So you constantly are
right,
going up and down the key. It's constantly constant reminder down the keyboard. Actually, show it's this way. Down the keyboard, and that's really the menacing kind of dissension of the crow. You can also see the crow as depression. You can see the crow as madness. You can see the crow as death. You can see the crow in a lot of different ways, just as you can see the linden tree as simply a tree or a memory, and Gute Nacht is just a
exactly,
walking.
yeah.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be actually surprised if maybe, because I know that like the Raven like by Poe was published in 1845, so I wouldn't have any sort of doubt that maybe somewhere in the lines that this piece sort of had somehow influenced this man to write something like that. I mean,
It's possible.
especially towards the second half of the epic, where it's that constant annoyance of the words, like nevermore, nevermore, nevermore.
Yeah, and that's the
Um,
thing, is that constant nevermore means literally. So as a culture, as a Western European culture, even an extension of that, we struggled with that as Americans to make sense of, and I say we as whether family was here or not, I'm talking about we as Americans in general who
right,
were
right,
here.
yeah, yeah,
Since we're living in this culture, we're struggling with the concept of death as they were expanding. This is stuff you have to know that, like, this is one of the parts of the analysis that I love telling. It's You have this fascination with death because you have different foreign, far away wars happening. What do you do? And the concept of dying and dying home with your
right.
family, well taken care of, is not the thing anymore. And we'll see that really play out in the U.S. Civil War. One of my favorite lectures, I will do it some other time possibly, and let you know. It's called Death in the Civil War, where I look at romantic music plus the Civil War and death. It's fascinating, and romanticism. But this absolutely plays into it. Edgar Allan Poe, Schubert, all of them were functioning in the same type of idea. So it would be natural that you have crows and other things, that
Right.
come from this. So
Yeah.
it
Uh,
absolutely. So the last
now,
one I
ladies,
look good.
and now, no, you were saying?
The last one I was going to go into the last one, but go ahead if
Oh,
you have
wait,
something
yeah,
to
yeah.
add about
So,
the
like, I was
crow.
gonna say now, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to touch on the last and probably the most insane, but the most insane subtle ending to a piece, Der
Right.
Lion Man. If you guys have ever like get a chance to listen to the end of this piece, it will leave your hairs raising. It's something that's very unknown.
Yes.
You put yourself into the unknown with this piece, and to really put it in common, this is like the next type of character that the traveler, the protagonist, does witness. I mean, you see a hurdy-gurdy, which is this old instrument that's sort of like a wind-up type of like thing that looks like a violin, but you wind it up and it has this sort of organ side of sound feel. A lot of like a very folk-like instrument that people would play in the streets to grab some coins and stuff like that. And we see our protagonist like just talking with the Lion Man, which doesn't really respond in any way, and it has such a repetition of this sort of like that has a sort of like piece sound that goes like
Yep.
and it's and then we have like the and it's very mysterious in that sort of sense. Like I know that it's in a different key within it's in the higher voice version. I personally prefer like the low version of it because it has more of that, not only the dramatic, but it's mysterious in its own right. I think it's like the G minor version that I
Yep.
admire more, just because
That's what I
like
just pulled to look. Yeah. Music, hashtag musicologist. I just pulled the book to look.
But like no, but I think it does
Yeah.
like it, like when in the context of the words and stuff. I think when somebody plays in G minor, there's more justice to it and how it should have been done, because you do have that sort of haunting sense. And I mean, like I as I listen to this piece, I also hear this a lot in like weirdly enough, in video games, I don't know, like for some of you, for some of our viewers that are watching, for some of you that play the video game or have seen the movie Silent Hill, if you listen to one of the pieces in the soundtrack of the film that goes a little bit like this, oh sorry, and if you compare that to Liar Man, which goes, you know, you do see that a lot. Like some people will pick up that sort of into the unknown type of reference. I mean, and again, Silent Hill is one of those examples. I'm sure there's more, but you know, this piece itself has so much to really like just excavate and just like observe and answer. I mean, what tell like Kristen, tell me, what do you think of this final piece by Schubert?
So Der Lehmann was written twice by Schubert. You have a 24A and a 24B. 24A is in A minor, and then you have 24B is actually in B minor.
Right.
And I chose to interpret it as A minor, as it leaves an unresolved end to the cycle, a dominant with no resolution. Because in Der Lehmann itself, there are these rests on dominant figures. It's never really answered. So let's run back. Where are we at here at this point, right? We have a main character that was clearly dumped and took a walk somewhere and didn't do real well with it. He thought about killing himself in a tree. That didn't work out so well. He figured to keep walking. And not to trivialize here, but you know, we're just getting the Reader's Digest version here.
Yeah.
Then we get you get this. He finally is like, oh, it's unattainable. I need to just accept my fate. The crow starts falling. That's when the crow comes in the picture and is like, don't worry, you're gonna die, and represent that. And then we get to Der Lehmann. So what happens is the main character emerges from the forest into a town, and there's a man there, and he's barefoot, and he's playing an organ grinder, which is that instrument you were talking about. And the main character goes up to the organ grinder. Everybody's ignoring the organ grinder, just walking by. And the main character's like, why do you play that? Why are you here? Why is everyone else ignoring you? Are you going to keep playing these songs? The main character makes no mention of the love he lost, the journey he was on, none of that. He just comes out and says, right over there, there's an organ grinder, but he keeps playing, but nobody listens to him. And at the very end, the main character goes, oh, well, I guess I'm going to sit here and sing with you. And that's how it ends.
Right. No, of course. And you know, for a lot of listeners, they're like, what happens next? Well, that's based on your decision, what your thought is to think about. Does he does he remain a vagabond? Does he remain a vagabond and like becomes like a sort of like member with this band of like with the hurdy-gurdy player? Does he, I don't know, is this sort of like this sort of ghostly personification that he is probably already gone and has sort of have this sort of haunting tone that, you know, we hear in other forms of songs like Is My Team Plowing from Vaughan Williams, on Winlock Edge. There's a lot of things that us as the listeners can think about at the end. The answers will not be clear to us, but we can always find a way to interpret what we think at the end of the day. And of course, I think it's fun because it's not a blunt type of answer saying, okay, this is what happened to dude, this, that, yeah, that, and it's like it leaves us thinking like, thinking us what really happened to this dude.
Right. That's what makes Winterreise so fascinating is not only, and that's why I brought up the double tonic complex. Not only are we not really clear what key this piece is in. I mean, yeah, we do know that it's in D minor when we analyze it by piece. I mean, the whole cycle, but the second half can be interpreted very differently. And I think it's important and I'm going to speak from a performer perspective since this is how I really approach them, is that it's really important that we understand the narrative and of course the physical aspects of that, the chords that are used, how Schubert did it. Everything I did with analysis in mind. So, and I can bring out these things in order to, for example, I think Der Lindenbaum's one of the best ones to really, really pull that from, even though Der Lehmann is like, no, actually, let's keep with Der Lehmann. I have a great example of that. You like that one. Let's keep with that one. Der Lehmann, we're at the end. Main character is like, what's going on here? So in the piano, you have these open note. Just these open chordal figures.
Right. Yeah.
Yup. They're open fifths. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah. So, oh my God, I'm counting my own Cutting on staffs here. Hashtag Professor Mello. It's fits. Yes, of course, it's fits. And there's these open fists there, thus denoting the hurdy-gurdy. A tale possibly as old as time, because we don't really use a lot of open fifths, do we? It sounds a lot like monks and Gregorian chants and things like that. Yet we have gum. So there's a couple questions to ask yourself. Is this a morality tale? Is this character die? Is this character just here and just hallucinating? It's how you do the analysis. So in this, how I chose it, when I did the analysis of the 5 songs for Winterreise for cello and piano. When doing Der Lehrmann, I looked at it and chose the key of A minor, which is 24A, to leave it open as a minor dominant, because I truly believe that somewhere back by the unattainable, back by the crow, the main character likely died. This is my interpretation. It doesn't have to be your interpretation.
You know, I actually kind of agree in that sort of sense, because like as I hear various vocal talks of this, you know, like I hear a very like ominous, clear sounding tone that it doesn't feel alive. It honestly feels like this character has already passed on, though we just don't know that he passed on.
So by the time you get to Dick Crahay, I had written the cello part, and this is that's where the instrumental part comes in. I'll get to that in just a second, and I'll make it a little quick. I wanted to write the De Croo really high up in the cello, up in thumb position, up all the way by the bridge, because it has this kind of chalky, kind of pleading sound that doesn't really. You can definitely vibrate, but you are working. You are working. And so it's got this kind of pleading whatever. And that's why I really wanted the crow to be up there, because I truly believe the man is already crossing over, dying. When we get to Der Lehrmann, it's played so without vibrato.
Right.
Therefore, as a performer, Fischer-Dieskau did that. No vibrato. Bum, bum, dum, ba, dum, bum, bum, bum.
Oh yeah, no,
bum,
totally.
bum.
And we hear that also.
Yeah, and that's the hollowness.
We hear that with like even with Bostridge when he goes like it's a very ghostly type of sound that, you know, like when eventually you would hear it again, like in pieces like Is My Team Plowing, both in I can't remember the other composer's names, but with Vaughan Williams on One Luck Edge. And then you can also hear it through like things like Peter Quinn in The Turn of the Screw, and that type of like ghostly type of mannerism.
Yeah. And it's exactly a lot of the things that when I saw you play in Turn of the Screw, by the way, guys, that was one of the most harrowing performances of the Turn of the Screw I ever had the pleasure of seeing. I was in the audience. It was wonderful. Woo! Okay, so
let me return the compliment. By the way, ladies and gentlemen, she has been such a phenomenal player as well in the production of Ariane off Naxos in Music Academy International. Both of those operas were performed last year.
I want to give.
And it was very nice because it fitted well. One was a comedy, one was a ghost story.
Yeah.
So it fitted the psyche very well.
Yep. I want to give props though to your principal cellist, Max Oliver. He killed that solo, did a great job. Assistant principal was Jason. His last name was Jay. Yeah. So very, very cool. I'll link those 2 people below. I was so happy to do that, but it was really your principal cellist was absolutely wonderful student at the academy. We'll give you some links to that below. So when I did this analysis, I sat down and thought about it with my instrument, and I labeled each part. And I'll be quick about this if you're still here. Thank you. I did each part as a little vignette onto a large story, which is, I believe, how Schubert was treating each piece anyway. So Gute Nacht is the departure. Der Lindenbaum is the call to suicide. Irrlicht is the unattainable.
Right.
Pro, the Tikkrei, it's probably the death. And Der Lehrmann is that internal suffering. Do we really ever get relief? We don't know. We haven't crossed over. We're here. We are other one. Maybe, I don't know. We'll find out later, maybe. And so I chose those, and the key mattered, and that's how. And in performing it, I used the instrument. Since I transcribed this for cello, I used the different parts of the instrument to bring out these themes. If I need to bring out a pleading sound, then I need to be doing it like a singer would, pulling back, kind of using the different parts of the bow, different parts of the instrument, different effects with chordal things and whatnot. And that matters because the interpretation plays into that. Certain
Right.
words, even when you play it as an instrumentalist, you have to make sure those words are present in the music that you're playing. Even if
No,
you're
of
not
course, yeah.
using the physical words, you are emoting them. And that's why I love working with vocalists, even though I'm not a vocalist myself, but working with vocalists and chamber artists to kind of get them to get that out. You're not
Right.
just playing a pretty piece of music about a guy that maybe died 100 years or 200 years ago. This
Mhm.
is a type of depression that is the work, like there is no end to this, and that is what we
Mhm.
need to see here. And he gives us the Schubert gives us the crumbs in these 5 songs to continue out this harrowing tale. And that's how I approached it, and that's how I perform it as a performer. I actually performed it last in October
Mhm.
at a university. And one of the things I do is take these on the road, do master classes, and show other people how to do this, and
Right.
of high school and college age.
Well, I hope that one day that if you do end up coming to the University of Miami, where I got my master's and everything, I hope that maybe one day you can present these wonderful works. And from an instrumental standpoint, I mean, this
I would
is a
love
work
that.
that I mean, this is a work that that is so enriched with so much dynamics in the character and in drama that I think it's as you said, it's much more than just singing.
Yeah,
It really, you have to really go in depth, and that's what's one of the things that I admire so much about Lieder, and so admire about chamber works in general, because it is more about that sort of humanistic approach. Even from a vocal instrumental standpoint, you really start getting more intimate with that than what you would probably do with maybe something that's grand and big and stuff. But the final question I got to ask, though, because I do know that Schubert wrote 3 big works in his lifetime, and this also this excludes his opera, because the opera doesn't is not really talked so much about, because even though the music was fascinating, but the libretto was not really that good. We talk about
that
cinema.
happens. It happens.
I can say the same thing with Vaughan Williams and like the Pilgrim's Progress. When is that ever done? Not to say that it's not bad, but it's whenever it's
It's
done.
just, yeah.
But like the 3 big works, that the Schöne Winterreise, and then Schwanengesang. I know that for a lot of Schwanengesang is like the swan song for a lot of people, that for our viewers, swan song is pretty much like the last work of a person in towards the end of their life or their career. I mean, Hayao Miyazaki, considered The Wind Rising as a swan song of a work before he retired. Because swan song is not technically a song cycle, but just more of a collection of poems that were founded by somebody after Schubert's death. Do you really consider more of like Winterreise his Schwanengesang, really?
I
Than
truly,
than the legitimate Schwanengesang that we have now today?
yeah. So the way that Schwanengesang came around, it. I don't believe it's presented anymore as a third song cycle, but I do believe in historical academia, at least up to 20 years ago, it was seen as like a third song cycle, but which is a great like musicology thing. It's always a this, but.
Yeah.
See, Schubert was writing up until he was dying because he had to pay debts, and he was living in a room that he was renting, more of an attic, from a friend of a friend. And he had been writing using the same piece of paper over and over again. His last bits of writing are both tragically horrible. Seeing, in fact, the last things that he wrote, because he's writing on small pieces of paper in different places because he doesn't have enough manuscript to work with because he had lost a
Right.
lot of money. He was, as you know, he came from a middle class family and was going to be a teacher, and then just walked out on that to become a composer. And he was quite good at both of those things. And so Schwanengesang was collected after he died. His debts needed to be paid. His family grabbed up what was left and said, here's some stuff. Publishers came in, kind of put them together, picked them apart. You really have to look at the urtext to see, or rather the autograph of what's left to see what Schubert really wanted. But a lot of it, some of it exists, but some of it doesn't. We have more
Right.
items from Gute Nacht, from other
Yeah.
or from De Winterreise and Die Schöne Müllerin and so on, than we have of his later works, because they were in such bad condition and then were sold off to pay off debts. They were sold off for a very low amount, by the way, very, very low amount. Put together, Schubert's family didn't really see the proceeds from this, so I don't really see it as a song cycle that Schubert would have wanted in his lifetime, just rather a collection of songs that he had done before he died, and some of them are quite wonderful. And also,
but ultimately, like Winterreise is his Schwanengesang. Like,
I do believe that Winterreise is his Schwanengesang.
That is his like farewell to the world, pretty much.
Pretty much, I think. and he had a very dark look at what was coming.
Right.
If we're to interpret that he had connected the two, which I think is not, I don't think it's 100%, but you can't deny that your own mortality comes into play in that. So yeah, one of the reasons that Winterreise just stuck out to me was because it's a different kind of depression. It's different, incredibly harrowing.
It's totally different. I mean, it takes us in a labyrinth of emotions compared to like where Shinamura, it's already a straight narrow path.
Yeah, you love me, you don't. You love me, you don't.
Yeah, it's kind of like, you're in a corn crop field and you don't even know where you're going. You might get the sweet corn, you might get the very bad corn that the crows have eaten. Anyways, so like again, this is a very fascinating cycle ultimately, and I think it's quite enriching and amazing, especially being in the first episode to just dive into the depths of everything. Before we go even into like the surface, we just punch that earth into the core of like where we find like this really dark true essence of Schubert. And what better way to start this the first episode of the first episode of the series than with you. I mean, like you really like you certainly have like a grasp on this, and I'm very pleased and very happy that you are my first guest artist and everything. So like before we conclude this episode, just to let you guys know, where can, for anyone who else wants to know more about you, Christine, where can we find more information about your music and maybe some upcoming projects that you might be doing?
So you can find me on Instagram at cmellocello. I'm active on Instagram. I also have a website, www.christinemello.com. I mostly update Instagram, and I do Schubert lectures on the road with master classes, and I perform them often. Of course, with COVID, that was not something that I plan to record publish and have these ready for summer, but that is not the case. Rather, the five songs for cello and piano, and what's happening right now is that we don't know. However, as soon as we're out of COVID, I will be advertising that I will be performing these in lecture recital series. It's funny. It's like we laugh. We spill some tea. It's like great. Talk about Schubert. Talk about falling in love. Talk about getting doped and playing some tunes and really kind of connecting with our own feelings and depression while also working through narrative. When I work with kids, it's all about narrative and feelings. And when I work with adults, it's all about narrative and feelings. So you find me CHristineMello.com, cmellocello at Instagram. I also teach for Music Academy International, where I met you at. And Music Academy International is a European abroad study that you go to festival. It's a part of the Maisano Romantica and Trentino Music Festival. And we expect to be back there for our 20th season in 2021. Very exciting.
Because with the unfortunate events and with a lot of summer programs that either had to be postponed or be virtual because of COVID, ladies and gentlemen, this program that I was very happy to be a part in back in 2019. I mean, there not only is there an opera program, but there's also a musical theater program. We were very fortunate to have two productions of Sister Act and Into the Woods. These young artists were very really knocked their socks off in these performances. Fantastic. As well as with my colleagues in the performances last year with La Clemenza di Tito, Ariane Naxos, and The Turn of the Screw. I mean, with my if any of my Turn of the Screw castmates are watching this, shout out to you guys. Love you very much. Miss you dearly. It's almost going to be an almost happy anniversary because it's almost going to mark a year since we've all sort of met and worked together and everything. But for any of you that are interested in this summer program, please log on to their website, www.musicacademyinternational.com. So you can see about so you can see more of what they have to offer for the 2021 season, which will be their
20th season.
Even though this year marks the 20th anniversary. But
COVID.
If you do get a chance, and for those any of you that are in the world of opera and Broadway, you'll see it over there, musicacademyinternational.com. So we'd like to thank you, Christina Mello. Thank you so much for being our first guest in this first of a many series of the Schubert Talks. Second episode will be next Saturday, June 27th, 2020 at 2:00 p.m. Why? Because I have my wonderful guest, who's a Broadway singer, and her and I graduated from New World School of the Arts, class of 2015. My dearest friend, Isela Guanica. And so we're going to be talking about how the world how Schubert has sort of has influenced the world of Broadway, which you can definitely see through various Broadway composers. But that's going to be talked about in
I
next
can't
Saturday's
wait.
episode.
I cannot wait. I love playing theater, musical theater. You know, that's what I love doing.
I
I
know.
love being cheap. That's like, can't wait.
So that's
Actually,
going to be, yeah.
I'm sorry. One thing I just wanted to throw one more thing about. I'm sorry. I'm like have to add one more thing about Schubert. It's really funny that you chose. Thank you so much, by the way, for having me. I'm honored to be here and talk about the thing that I literally have spent the past 20 years of my life working with, which is Winterreise and Schubert in general. I'm a Schubertologist. I like to talk Schubert. I'm the narrative. I like telling narratives, and I like playing narratives. And I'm a cellist, so I love when I can put them all together. And the thing that I think is great that Schubert, which is why I love that you started with Winterreise first. The first line of Winterreise is, "As a stranger, I arrived, and as a stranger, I departed."
There you go.
So very cool. I'm so excited. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited. I can't wait to see Broadway. Anyone else? We will rebroadcast this, I guess, and we'll put some links down below to have some stuff. Where can you find my transcriptions? I don't know. After COVID, it's coming. We'll figure it out. And where to keep in touch? Let's keep in touch.
And so, ladies and gentlemen, we thank you so much for being part of this, viewing this live stream for the first episode of the Schubert Talks series. So again, episode 2, Schubert on Broadway with guest star Isela Guernica. And we hope that you can come and see it. Again, it's going to be aired on Saturday, June 27th, 2020, at 2:00 p.m. It's going to be a little bit early compared to tonight's time, because my dear friend lives in Europe, in Spain. So for all of my colleagues that are probably going to watch this maybe like tomorrow or something, you'll have the chance to see the next episode live streamed at 8:00 over there in Europe. So to all my friends, I hope you have a wonderful evening, a wonderful happy Father's Day weekend, guys.
Yes.
Thank you so much for coming and watching this beautiful discussion, and we hope to bring in more and more episodes to come.
Thanks, guys. It was great talking. It was great being on your show.
Great. Thank you again, Christine.
Have a good one.
You too.